bit of friendly competition. Well, I'm going to kind of go at the shotgun
I've not been to
approach.
Star East for donkey's years. I've not been there for 7 or 8 years, something like that.
Anyway, well, we're live now anyway, and so I'm doing this month I'm doing Star West, right? And I've got it's quite exciting, kind of a few things. I've got originally we wanted to kind of Jason. Myself wanted to do a workshop, right? That was our original run around doing, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later about this multi-threaded prompt verse, which is going to mind melt everybody. But then also we wanted to do some obviously he's doing the opening keynote and I'm doing a talk on probably the last of this season, which is why I'm looking for next season's kind of talks for the turning testers into superheroes, the dancing 20,000 view edition thing, which is good. And I'm extending it as it progresses. But, next year I'm kind of, so I spent a bit of time with Nico yesterday and I was kind of like, I want to hit quantum, right? Because we did the first quantum computing and testing at the British Computer Society. Which was great, but obviously quantum's such a new topic, it feels a bit specialist.
It's a bit too early, I think.
It is a bit too early for it, yeah. But I was teasing that it could go into quantum. So I did start looking at something like Schrodinger's cat does QA, real inside of the black box testing, right? Or something really kind of tongue-in-cheek, which seems to be the way that people are doing. But at the same time, I was like, okay, we need to have a sensible thing. So we're actually running on the Tuesday at Star West. We're running an advisory board workshop session with Jason, which should be great fun. And then Tariq's hosting an AI panel discussion, which is what I did last year at Star West, and a talk on. I don't know what it was. I don't think it was the metaverse, but I think it was still Gen AI. But the problem is Gen AI is on everyone's topic, which I know is on your topic as well, right? And it was kind of the discussion we had. We obviously have our discussions every Friday, but it was around mentor. It is a Gen AI a mentor or a coach, right? Which I think is one of your potential topics.
It's definitely a theme, yeah.
But I think it's an interesting point, and it kind of, I know it doesn't sound like it interweaves with the multi-threaded prompt verse, but it actually kind of partially does.
I think you'll manage it. I think I can hear myself echoing a little bit.
Yeah, only a little bit. Let me just turn you down a little bit. That should be okay. I think it's because you're in the live from the cyber bunker, right? So tell everybody about your bunker, because I think this is the first live stream you've done from the bunker, right?
Are we live now?
We are, yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay. Well, welcome to my cyber shed. It's a box. Well, you didn't. You told me about 20 minutes ago that we were doing this, so I am utterly unprepared. But over the past few months, a few months ago, I decided I wanted a garden office. Let's call it. I call it a shed, but it's not a shed. It's an office. It's a proper building, and here I am. But it's 60% gym, 40% kind of the workplace. And if I flip my camera, you can actually see. Say I'm not lying. There's a rowing machine, an exercise bike, weights, dumbbells, even a whiteboard, and so on. And where I'm sat is a desk with a computer on it, and I've got a backup server here because the important stuff is in the house. So I back up to my cyber shed. But that's about it, really. I mean, it's just a part office, part gym. So there you go.
I think it's more than that, because obviously Google Maps, you've set the terrain on the top to be grass. So it's actually, you can't see it from space. And I don't know if this is your thinking about the lines of setting something up. So I don't know if you caught that. I was on the Times radio last week, I think, and talking about Telegram, right? And it's quite interesting because obviously Telegram has got into a lot of trouble recently about this whole encryption stuff and people misusing these kind of platforms for illegal purposes, right? A bit like the cyber shed kind of thought process. But it's quite interesting that and that was kind of what I was saying on I'd say, well, I've got a face for radio, so it obviously fit quite nicely. But part of it is by default encryption's not on. It's actually encryption to the server side, which means that the actual physical servers, which are probably in Paris or in wherever they store them on Telegram, which is nearly 1 billion users, same as Facebook Messenger, right? Is actually they can read them. So unless people move this into secret mode, they can't. Potentially they could go and access this illegal content that's been happening, right? It's quite interesting, kind of landscape. But I think part of it is people. I don't know. I was in London this week, and I kind of thought to myself, are people wanting to move back on premise, right? Are people wanting to move to the edge, store as much as possible instead of the cloud, And I think, I know obviously people have been thinking the cloud is a cloud that doesn't have a sustainability SDG goal or something, but really it's just a data center. Can you manage your own data centers, and can you manage them more effectively than a centralized one? And I'm at the point now where I'm looking at AWS bills for compute, and like we're both running those 4090s or whatever they are with 24 gig VRAM. We can do enough, and it'll go into this multi-threaded prompt stuff in a second, but it's can you do enough with your local NPUs that you don't actually need a CUDA or a cloud environment? But it also kicks off a lot of heat, which is why I've got all the windows open and I've got all my servers that are on my desk warming my feet, and that's why I'm always wearing shorts.
Well, me too. Well, it was very humid in London the last couple of days, and one of the reasons I felt a bit poorly was the heat just got to me because I was wearing jeans and a shirt that was too heavy, I suppose. And I think I just overheated and dehydrated. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But a long time ago, I was told by a good friend that the lifespan of an IT director or CTO or a CIO was about 18 months. And what do these folk do when they join a company? Well, whatever the last CIO or CTO or IT director did, they either reverse it or change direction or whatever. So if it was offshoring last year, it's now inshoring. If it's managing your own data center, okay, now it's going to the cloud. And if it's the cloud, you bring it in-house. It doesn't matter what it is. It's changed for the sake of it, so they can get it on their bloody CV, And you think, well, that's a very cynical view, but unfortunately, that is actually what is happening. And that's been happening since forever, So
the 60s, yeah.
But the thing is, I think the economic case for cloud isn't what it used to be, because prices are higher now, and the value of what these guys do is very high, but a lot of the problems are still there. So a lot of the problems of configuration and integration, whatever, are still there. The fact you can ramp up virtual machines in no time flat, well, you know what? You can do that on your own infrastructure. The challenge is, do you have? It's a what's the word? It's an emotional thing to have your own equipment and your own data center. You can point at it, and it's impressive when the CEO is escorted around the facility, that you can point to this throbbing warehouse full of kit doing stuff, even if it's completely unintelligible to the CEO. It's an impressive asset to show off. Whereas the cloud is just a picture on a wall. Not quite as impressive for all those millions, So I don't think it's an unusual or unexpected thing. But having said all that, you can actually make progress, as we're trying to do, with a reasonably powerful server with a graphics card dropped in it. Certainly experimentation, and to be honest, a lot of what we seem to get involved in at the moment is kind of experimentation. So, building MVPs and prototypes, that seems to be, we've got plenty. We're doing all right. And the cost of actually using, and having said that, the cost of actually using ChatGPT isn't high until you want to go into production, and then maybe it's not the right solution. So for $20 a month or so, you can get an awful lot for your money. So
I think that's the interesting thing. So like I've started doing some stickers that I'm going to give out. First set of stickers that I started creating for Star Wars, right? Limited edition kind of, and I've gone with, because Star Wars Outlaws came out, and Star Wars, obviously, we can probably see from the background, there's quite a bit of Star Wars theme in there. I've got one which I've got on the screen at the moment, which is the view of well, there's a series of them. So let me give you the series just so you're feeling the emotional entanglement, shall we say? The first one is a standard prompt, and I think this is my kind of partial problem, right? Is when people think about Gen AI, they think about prompt engineering, right? They think about, you write a message, most of the time not very intelligently, and you expect a response, right? And you expect a response which is, we're saying at the moment is 90% fluff, right? It reads beautifully and it tricks the human,
but in all though, you need it. You need it.
But it's a lot of fluff. And so I start the first sticker series with a credit to Tariq's for his markdown method. But the markdown method is, in essence, a good effort at a one shot, right? And I think that's the problem, is most people do one shotting, right? Which is fine, because we've all learned one shotting from using ChatGPT. Is it the right approach? Absolutely not, right? But that's what people think about when they think about Gen AI, or you do one shot, right?
Yeah.
So the markdown method is, you put a mission statement, you kind of have a goal, you describe the persona, you describe the input variables, you explain how you want the output structure in a single prompt, right? And you might embed data into that and everything else. But in essence, that one-shot prompt has a little bit more of a formalized structure on it, which is fine. I've got on the, in the pure Star Wars thing, I've got a mission statement which says, test the Death Star plans, requirements plans for vulnerabilities, right? So that this is your, 20 years of building the Death Star, right? You've got a few prequels in there, Rogue One, you've got, the original movies where they start with the saying that thousands of rebels died getting these Death Star plans. And then you even see, the episode 1, 2, 3 prequels where they're passing the Death Star plans, which in essence is a requirement spec between each other on these kind of what could be classed as Star Wars USB sticks, right? So part of it is these blueprints, requirements, Death Star plans are a spec. And, it's a big spec because it's a huge Death Star, right? By its, area. But, if you one-shot it, and I'm not saying blowing up the exhaust vent for a second, if you one-shot with that structure, it could read all the Death Star plans and come back and say, within a few seconds, because it's at the edge, it's an MPU. Obviously, it isn't an MPU when you're in Star Wars land, because everything's just a flashing box, right? Because they don't have AI. Otherwise, they would have found this in about 30 seconds. It goes through. So actually, I found a critical defect that actually is a thermal exhaust that if you hit it just right, if you're some kind of, farmer who's good at, shooting, rats or whatever they are, one rats or whatever Luke Skywalker was doing in his spare time, when he should have been doing stuff better. He was instead being irresponsible and killing animals, right? But part of it is you could see this vulnerability, and then what you could do is you should create this little metal flap which would stop, that from happening. And then underneath, under the RAG architecture, it would say Death Star plans, subsection Stardust, which is obviously the Rogue One name for the girl who is the main lead. And Stardust is the requirement spec section, which talks about this vulnerability that the designer, the architect, the portfolio management, the enterprise architect, whoever it was, wanted to put this vulnerability in so small that no one would notice it, because no one's got large language models in the future, or actually it's in the past because it's in a galaxy a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. So obviously they haven't got Gen AI yet because it only came out 3 years ago, right? Otherwise, Luke would have been done for. But part of it is that's what people think, right? That's it. You ask it to look at the Death Star plans, and it finds the exhaust vat thing, and then some stormtrooper, I'm guessing, goes up with a metal thing into the cyber bunker or whatever, and just sorts it out. Now, obviously, that's how people think about large language models, right? They think it's a one shot. So then the second in the series, which was the spoiler one, then says, great one shot. That was 1 in 7 billion. And so the joke is supposed to be, which is quite a competitive thing, is everyone is building on ChatGPT, all with an API call with a one shot to a 7 billion model if they're smart enough to not use ChatGPT. So they're bringing it offline and bringing it down onto their device. And it's a 7 billion model, which isn't a massive model, but it's enough for a basic map of the world, i.e. it knows what a thermal exhaust vent is because it's a language dictionary, but it still doesn't have a RAG architecture, as in it doesn't actually have the Death Star plans because, surprise, surprise, Darth Vader was like, I'm not putting my IP out there onto the internet because otherwise people will be building the Happy Star and the Party Star and make it into a giant disco ball or something. So part of it is, I think, context is everything, but still everyone one shots against a model which is just a language model and doesn't have any contextual information and hopes that the Death Star plans got leaked onto the internet. And then obviously Sam this week turned around and said, you can't train a large language model without at least 70% copyrighted material. And I thought to myself, at that point, I was like, the world has gone absolutely mad. We're using a large language model that isn't just the interwebs and the archive.org, but it's built on proprietary, stolen Death Star plans. So anyway, that was my sticker intro. But what's your thoughts about kind of, and we're obviously you say ChatGPT, but when you mean ChatGPT, you really mean like private GPT or something else that you're building offline, but you can prove the hypothesis quickly from an experimental perspective against a public-facing large language model, right? But RAG is important.
Yeah, I think RAG's a partial solution. I can hear an echo coming from your end. I don't know if it's you're blasting me out at 900 watts or something, but anyway, by the by. So my view is, I think a naive view of what AI does is it's an all-seeing, all-knowing, infallible genius that you ask it a question, it gives you a perfect answer. And if you like, that's level 0 on the naivety scale about what it does. But it's not unrealistic, because if you think about what the large language models are doing, is they're trained on this vast library of content of dubious portent, or heritage, or whatever, that kind of thing, and that's another issue, of course. But it understands regular English, and you can ask it regular questions. You can have typos in your question, and you can be a bit muddled in your question, and it will figure out what you're getting at. And if you have an exchange with it, if you have an interaction and a chat, where you ask a question, it gives a vague answer because you gave it a vague question, and you try and home in on the knowledge you actually want to get out of it. It feels like you're talking to a human who is all-knowing, all-seeing, all-knowledgeable, all-perfect, godlike almost. So maybe, so the second level, and I'm making this up as I go along, but the second level would be, it's not perfect, so you have to give it sharper questions to get more focused answers. And out of that springs the whole notion of prompt engineering, which I think is a terrible term. It's about sort of getting your language right. And it's prompt engineering. It's not engineering. It's speaking right, what like I do, Anyway, so prompt engineering is like a game of the day at the moment. And of course, with people's security and privacy concerns, it's a clear route would be to use your own technology running the service, and RAG builds from there, in that you want to put your own information. That actually, I'm not interested in the 115 billion element model out there. I'm interested in the stuff that we do in-house. And I just want to provide a little help desk facility for people who want to know how to order lunch on the intranet, and that's all I want. And so be it. That's fantastic. Now, I think from that, and again, I don't think this is a step in maturity, but the things that I've been involved in recently, and you've known about, obviously, are things where you're looking for a coach, and the coach might, the challenge might be, I want to lose weight, I want a diet plan, I want an exercise plan, I want to know what supplements to take. And the naive approach to that is, well, you can ask AI and say, look, if I want a diet plan out of you, ChatGPT, what information do you need to have for me to get something meaningful from yourself? So you ask it what it needs to know. And that is your first, kind of, if you like, question to it. And it'll give you a long list of things that would be helpful to it, doing its analysis, diagnosis, recommendation, whatever. So then obviously the next step is, that's fantastic. Okay, ChatGPT, can you create a questionnaire for me, which I can just plug into an app, fill in, press a button, and then you give me a diet and exercise plan, say. Now, that's kind of easy to implement, and it works, but you're treating the whole aspect of the AI as a single shot, as you said. And in the background, you might be generating background prompt text based on stuff, but in your questionnaire, you're going to have, what are my goals? Do I have any conditions I need to be careful and being aware of? What do I weigh now? What's my target weight? What exercise do I enjoy? What exercise do I hate? Do I have access to a gym? Do I have my own gym? Have I got any disabilities? Dum-de-dum-dum, all this stuff. And you package all that into a questionnaire and fire off this long prompt, and it comes back with, lo and behold, a diet plan and an exercise plan. Fantastic. Now, if you're trying to do something original and meaningful, that's fantastic, but there must be at least 100 apps out there that do that now in that space. I mean, maybe 100, maybe 500, I don't know, because conceptually, that's dead easy. And actually, you're not asking for a coach, you're asking for a mentor, because a mentor, if you like, the difference between mentoring and coaching is, mentoring is where the mentor has experience, knowledge that you want to pick their brains. You want to ask a question and get a solution. There's a bit more to it, obviously, than that, but essentially, the mentor has all the answers you ever would require. It might offer you choices, and you make a choice, and then you discuss it, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, the mentor is the all-knowing, all-seeing entity or person, more typically, that can help you achieve some personal goal, personal development, sorting out your career, maybe relationship issues, who knows what. But you're asking for, here's my situation, give me a recommendation. Now, I think that has some value in some contexts, but I think increasingly when you get into stuff like giving advice and using AI to give advice, mentoring isn't the answer, and therefore that model isn't the answer either. So I think where we should be moving to, and I think the more advanced applications that are out there take very seriously, is they're using a coaching model. And a coaching model is different from mentoring. The coach does not need to know much about the subject matter. But what they do need to know is to have the ability to ask, let's say, Socratic questions, questions that tease out information. And so all the stuff that's on the questionnaire is really, you're preempting a conversation with a coach. You've basically said to the AI, what are all the questions you would ask me? Okay, okay, that's a questionnaire. I'll fill it in, press a button. But of course, life isn't as simple as that. And most of the problems that we'd really love help with are much more complex than tick these boxes and bingo, out pops the result. So the AI has to know what a good question looks like. It also, behind the scenes, as a human would do, it's self-reflecting. So if you like, the prompt might say, the app might say, what are your goals? What do you want to achieve? If it's a health, context. And it might be lose weight, get into my clothes, just feel good about myself. I want the social aspect of joining a community of cyclists or gym goers or footballers or runners or whatever, etc., etc. Now, the AI doesn't want to get into a really complex conversation, but the AI can ask itself, what is the most important thing I need out of this person in order to answer their question? So obviously goals are a starting point. And once you've established the goals, the questions then spring from that goal, and then there are preferences and so on. And what I think we should be doing is getting the AI to question itself and say, what information do you need to give advice? But you're not going to give advice. You want to put these thoughts, make offers and ask questions of the user so they figure it out for themselves. And you keep asking questions to draw them into places that they haven't considered or thought about or researched. Now, that's a different problem, and it's definitely I think, a more mature approach. Now, is that possible? That's the next question. I think that's where we're at. I think a lot of what I read nowadays is a lot of the AI initiatives are kind of paused because they've hit that block. Single shot questions don't give you, they might give you answers, but you can't trust them to the degree that you could productize it and charge money for it. It's not safe. Giving mental health advice. I mean, do you really want to get into that? Do you want to be prescribing medications? Do you want to be telling people how to fix wounds? I mean, these are all fantastic things that we'd love to have AI help us with, but these require massive experience, knowledge, and reflection, and nous. They've got to be streetwise, in whatever that street is. So I think one of the reasons that a lot of AI initiatives have kind of stalled a little bit or have stopped because they think it's not safe to go any deeper into the water, because they're working on this mentoring kind of model rather than a coaching model, which is a real step up in sophistication. It's not prompt engineering. There's more to it. And I don't think there's many examples out there and examples of how people can do this. Or are sharing how they've done it. I imagine the Googles and the Microsofts and those guys, have got a lot further ahead than we have. And some of the academics, I've no doubt, are thinking along those lines. But commercially, I don't see much that looks. I mean, I'm not all seeing, all knowing. I don't know everything that's being done in AI, but I just get the sense that we're kind of at a pause in progress. We're not seeing anything that's terribly exciting, really.
Well,
I don't think,
I think this is where I'm going to come in. I'll hit you. If you hit the mute for a second, hit the mute just so you don't get the reverb on it for a second. So, so this is kind of where I think the next bit comes in, is this multi-threaded prompt verse, which I'm not going to take full credit for. I'm going to kind of push a bit of credit to Jason, a bit of credit to my team. The initial thought came out around the idea of using a large language model, so when we were building unfortunately what they refer to as a poly AI or polyamorous AI, which is a bit worrying, is the idea is you have multiple models. You have a model that's good at, like you said, mental health. You have a model that's really good at fitness, and you run them in parallel, or you run the load one out at one response. It's the Babel fish. It's the input and the output. The output may use multiple models, right? So that's where we kind of got to. And then one of my R&D engineers kind of said, well, I don't quite understand why we're doing prompt chaining, prompt tuning, and 17, threads, 17 prompts in a chain that's going through and trying to refine that to the point of be like, is this a safe recommendation? What's the toxicity? What's the fluidity? Is this the right format for the output? Does this logically make sense? Pass it back in Jason's view of what prompt should have I asked? what's the accuracy of this prompt, what question input value should I provided, all of these refinements and tuning, as we would use the term, right? I think that kind of got to a certain point, and that was great because it had structure, right? But the bit which this, and I kind of, I'm going to give a bit of credit to Ryan Reynolds as well for Deadpool. So obviously the new Deadpool movie, with a bit of lazy writing, decided that everything has got to do with the multiverse, right? And I kind of took the exploration, the input from that, and obviously tailing on to the end of my superheroes thing, I was like, okay, well, actually, if you look at it, the time variance kind of Loki stuff was all around, in essence, threads breaking off, variants breaking off the main, timeline, right? And so the thing is, what's interesting about this is one of the engineers said, well, why are we firing off prompts when we need to work out how the Death Star plans? Why aren't we firing off prompts anyway to be utilizing that GPU, NPU 99.9% of the time? And this then goes back, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, infinite probability engine. Why aren't we just asking it everything? And I kind of said, okay, well, that's great. What about this idea of, and I'll throw it onto your example here, is like, what about changing, if we take that prompt structure, we say, we're acting as a fitness coach because you're working out in your garage, right? What happens if we add a psychiatrist to it? What happens if we add that actually Paul isn't a QA or a thought leader in that space? What happens if Paul is a therapist? What if Paul's a nutritionist? What happens if Paul's a doctorate? What happens if Paul's an MIT professor who's talking about new hypotheses or new papers around the way we should be looking at of diet or whatever else it is, right? So if we then push those off as multiple threads and we try to let them live their own natural language, their natural thing, and obviously the joke around quantum teleportation, but moving between quantum tunneling between the different threads, is a point will drop off where the actual variance will die. So maybe the professor finishes his work on how fitness, mental health, and sleep all directly correlate, and it comes to a natural end. Now that, in a way, is, like you said, procrastinating is someone spending a whole stack of time thinking about it and then coming back with actually, what if? And I think this is the interesting part, is like, to me, the co-pilot function, and I think you summarized it nicely, and we're going to see this month for Apple Intelligence, right? Is, do I want Apple Intelligence with the therapist subscription for $44.99? Do I want Apple Intelligence with the survivalist, because I'm loving to go out into the wild and I need to know which mushrooms not to eat because I'm going to get hallucinations, right? Part of it is, do you want to pay $9.99 or $99.99 for, the NHS doctor or the Stanford, health center one? And it's all based on compute and knowledge, right? And so part of it is people are going to start making decisions about how they can, co-pilots can be supercharged. And then, I think the idea is, if these multi-threaded anomalies are going off, doing large amounts of thought process around taking your data, which is fitness data, and then correlating it to videos they've seen you running and all sorts of stuff, and going, actually, there's an underlying problem. He's got an overactive thyroid, but he's also got this weird condition from birth, looking at some of his x-rays, that actually he shouldn't be rowing, and that rowing injury that he had at Oxford actually now could potentially, cause, something really bad or some kind of disease. This is what I think the future looks like. And I think this concept of multi-threaded persona or kind of multiple lives off a thread is really interesting. But with that said, what's your thoughts about the multiverse threading thing? And I'll let you come off mute to answer that. You need to unmute first. Yep. Unmute or not mute.
I'm sorry, I apologize. I like the idea of using, for example, let's look at the problem through the eyes of a different persona or stakeholder, or let's look at the customer's view versus the suppliers, or the contractors versus the consultants, or whatever, get all that. But I think personas are just one dimension of perhaps many. And to me, the problem is we all want, I would hold to the view that if I had my bookcase behind me, and I was using, and that represented all the knowledge that I ever wanted to have, and it's not in my head, but I know where to get it. It's on the bookshelf. AI at the moment is like my idiot savant servant. So when I get a thought and I say, well, what about X? Have we any examples of X in this domain, of this subject matter domain? And the AI will go off and find the reference in the book, and if it's RAG, fantastic, and it will tell me this is the place to look, and this is a summary of the book, or the article, or the speech, or the podcast, or whatever the source is, and it will give me some content and interpret it and say this might be what you're looking for. Fantastic, but that's using pre-existing knowledge. And if you're an elite athlete, you don't want an exercise regime that's generated to help someone to lose weight. You want an exercise regime that's going to help you beat the guy who holds the world record. Now, that is a very different perspective to take. Now, so you could structure that challenge into a prompt which might say, it's not a persona thing, it's more what is the physiology of this guy? What is his training regime? What is he doing that seems to help, as opposed to that could help you and might cause you problems? What's missing from all that is innovation. And I don't think AI at the moment, and the way we're using it, has anything to do with innovation. It doesn't come up with innovative ideas. It comes up with stuff that someone else has written before. And it's literally matched your problem to some possible solution simply because the word pattern seems to be saying something similar that's relevant to your problem. And I'm reminded, kind of randomly, I'm sorry about this, but like many people with a kind of a STEM background, I love physics, and one of my heroes is Richard Feynman. And everyone says this, but not many people have got his books. His lectures on physics, and for about 15 years they were actually in my bedroom. Can you imagine what a place to put a book like a 3-volume set of books? Anyway, one of his stories is he was in the cafeteria at university one time, and they got into a discussion. The people just sat eating their lunch. They got into a discussion about spinning plates, like on little poles, and you put a plate, you spin the plate, and then you give the pole a jiggle. It's very flexible. Give it a jiggle, and the plate spins around in a very uneven looking way, because it's not perfectly, doesn't spin in the same plane. It kind of wobbles. And he said, I wonder what the mathematics or the physics of that is actually all about. So he went back, because he loved puzzles, and he went back to his room and he figured out the mathematics of spinning plates. Now, that was completely useless for anything except spinning plates. 10 years later, or some years later, he was scratching his head to deal with a problem in quantum physics. And he remembered the maths he used to model spinning plates. And he said, you know what, that bloody well fits. And he used that. And then he got a Nobel Prize. Now, it's not necessarily, you get the gist of the idea. He took something that's completely unrelated and reapplied it. And innovation, I think the word literally is kind of means a new way of looking at things. And that's what humans bring to the table, because we have some weird connections in our brains that the AI simply will never have. Or maybe it doesn't have it yet because we're using large language models. It's a large language model. It's not an innovation engine. It's not what we would love it to be yet. So somehow we need to figure out the way of prompting that thought process. So it's almost like, and I think you mentioned this yourself in looking at personas and stuff like that, is, I can't remember, you turn the temperature down or you turn the temperature up to get more wild matches. We need to use a lot more wilder settings that give us wilder ideas. and then get the GPT to say, is there any possibility you could use this wild idea? Could we use it in our context? And almost get it to do that offline. Don't bother me with that, because I can't look at 250 different wild ideas in 10 minutes like you can. So, and I think we need research in that area. I think it's research. It's a research topic, not necessarily. I don't think we're seeing apps that are going to do that. And in a way, that's why testing is a difficult challenge for AI, in that it's not about doing stuff that any idiot could do, because the stuff, and James Barker and Michael Bolton will hammer this home and say, look, the human in the loop is the essential ingredient. I agree. For a lot of testing, you don't need much innovation, but to do the job properly, you do. Because every application you see is absolutely unique. The users are different, the business goals are different, the technology is different, everything's different. So it's not well-trodden ground. So you have to use your imagination. And large language models have anything but an imagination. So we still have big problems. And I'm not able to articulate that very well, except that I think what I'm saying is reasonable. The academics probably have all this defined, perfectly sort of articulated, in some paper somewhere or other. But I think that's the problem we're hitting, in that we want more than just a Q&A bot. We want more than something that's just going to give us the answers to our problems, even with big questionnaires, highly structured, in JSON, perfectly formatted, so we can throw data in and get data out and generate beautiful reports and responses to humans. So I think, I think that's the problem.
Yeah, no, I think
you're looking at personas is an aspect of that, but I think it's not just personas; it's all sorts of other dimensions, and that's like, oh, here we go, the infinite multiverse,
infinite probability engine multiverse, and I think you're right. I think there's two things on here, and I'm just going to give an example. I remember a day where we were having a pint of Guinness with Chris Ambler in Ireland, right? And we were talking, it's many years ago, about Internet of Things in that particular case, right? And, so I'm going to refer it back to yesterday you'll see across x.com and everything else, I'm kind of talking about a large game release that happened yesterday and giving the developers some quite interesting feedback, which obviously was quite negative, right? And it's interesting because the two big AAA games, one of them's a Star Wars game, which launched quite well. And Chris was obviously very responsible for one of the big launches for an EA game, right? Which catastrophically failed. But he turned around and said, it will not launch. We've done 4,000 hours of testing. They're going to do 4,000 hours of testing in the first 10 minutes. We're not ready. Do not launch this game. They sacked him. And then, the history stands. Now, yesterday, one of the original games on a PC was called Test Drive. It was a really I used to have it on DOS, right? It was a really basic concept, basic physics, a bit like a flight sim, thing. And, 30 years in the making, shall we say. They've released another one yesterday, went live. And I spent most of the day utilizing one of my automation tools to keep on hitting the retry button, because it just kept on trying to log in and then saying login failed, because obviously the login servers just couldn't take the amount of people that had signed up for this AAA game, right? And then the next thing is I finally got in about 9 o'clock or whatever, and every single screen there was an error. And I literally took 40, 50 screenshots of just a different error, a unreadable error and a non-actionable error. So even though it gave you an option of do you want to retry or say no, both of them didn't work. So it was kind of, the human was not really a value. And I was sat there and I was persevering, and because I've got a little bit of experience in this, in fact, I'm going to call it chaos engineering for a second. I was like, I'm going to keep on going and see how many errors I can get before it literally just completely kills itself. But at the same time, I'm just going to keep on posting, I'm not going to say abuse or trolling, but I'm keep on passing this to the developers, hoping that maybe they read their Twitter feeds, right? And I was surprised that there weren't a lot of people all talking about this catastrophic login failure of one of the biggest games. And it's because it was a limited edition that gives you 7 days early access. And so therefore the smaller subset, right? It's the smaller A-B set. But what was really interesting is you might say every time is like, we've launched games before with large volumes. Why on earth is a bit like Grand Theft Auto, a car game which has multiple people in a physics engine? Why can't that work and launch successfully with all the stuff that we know? And it's exactly that. I think you probably saw testers doing the same thing they always do. You know, they probably brought some performance engineers in who said, oh, we'll model those API calls and those GPX information of where the cars are, and we'll simulate that to 10,000 users, or if it was 1 million at launch, you know, we'll do all that concurrency and we'll load the servers up. So why did it not work, right? And if you remember Alan Page, I remember sitting down with Alan when he was doing some Xbox stuff, and we were in Sydney with Dr. Emma Langdon, and literally he said, you know, Microsoft Operations Manager used to be able to measure some of the Forza games and send information that, you know, a Xbox in Saudi Arabia, where the ambient temperature outside is 100 F, is slowing down by 2 frames per second on a corner, and then it'd do in essence, a dump of the crash analytics to send that and then optimize the driver to run at a better temperature and everything else. And they were doing that 15, 20 years ago when you wrote the book on how Microsoft tests, right? Now, why aren't we there? And the answer is because, and I'm going to move this to my smart city days, is smart cities were all about, especially in Dubai, was all about taking historical information like Bristol's or Cambridge's smart city program, taking all the, you know, the traffic and plot patterns and all the real data, and then modeling the same thing at a greater scale for Dubai, which is notoriously badly designed, right? So the interesting thing is, if we keep on trying to solve the same problems, thinking we can do them ourselves and not share these complex models of knowing that actually, Jonathan, you know, Oxford, bad connectivity, you know, and I'd got turned all the analytics on, so I could see the packet loss dropping and stuff. And I was like, you know, his packet loss was like 100%. And I'm thinking, this isn't just me. This is a real problem you've got here, right? And I think this is the interesting thing is we test things like it's the first time we're doing it, and that is specific to that. Whereas we're not bringing that collective intelligence of all the problems across different industries and stuff like that. I think it's a harder problem than we're actually credit for. We're just firing off the raw, you know, messages and expecting, you know, that will be enough once we've hit those volumes, and not adding in all of the, you know, the packet loss, retry, jitter, you know, all the real world chaos engineering landscapes, people disconnecting, people like me with an automation tool just hitting the retry login button every single thing. It's just adding more load to the back end, right? And don't say it was me that brought the entire AAA game down, but I'm saying there's a problem here, right? And I think we need to think about out of the box solutions and not just say to it, oh, create me a JMeter traffic profile for a AAA, you know, car game.
I think there's a real challenge for testing of massive online applications or games. Games got there first by some margin, but then, you know, I suppose, you know, Google is a massive online, not a game, but it's an application, isn't it? But I remember talking to some Sony guys. I did a bit of teaching with them, and the leader, the test lead, you know, in the whole program, sort of said, well, we put over the course of 18 months or whatever the period was, I've got the numbers wrong, but one number sticks in my head, is we applied 200 man years of testing to this app, to this game, before it goes live on the internet. And in the first 24 hours of release, there is, I can't remember the numbers, I was trying to work it out while you were speaking, but I don't know if it's, I'm gonna throw a number in, which is probably wrong, doesn't matter. 15,000 man years or person years, I should say. 15,000 person years of usage, and in effect testing, because people are learning the game and how to figure it out. They're making all the mistakes in the book to get started. So if we're prepared to wait 2 days, we could probably reduce our testing by 100 man years, just like that. But we've just got to say, look, this is not as mature as we would always like, but guys, help us out. Make this thing special and delightful and everything else. So there's a challenge there. But if you're doing testing on the basis of a structured approach, that's probably the least interesting stuff, because that's going to get sorted very quickly. Bugs are going to be found very quickly. If your focus is bugs and you're using a structured approach, those bugs are going to be found instantly and reported and cause you a lot of grief and so on and so forth. So you've got to find them. And structured approach is systematic. You need to, if you've got 100 people in the team, you can't just say everybody have a play. It's got to be kind of organized and a systematic approach. Anyway, blah blah blah. But it's nothing. It's a drop in the ocean compared with what would ideally be required to make that game perfect. And we have that problem across all testing because relatively, not many organizations apply 200 man years to a product. Only big companies can afford to do that. And huge programs of work get that amount of attention. Most apps get nothing like that attention. So we really are, I want to say pissing in the wind, but it's like the climate is not right for what we think we can do manually. Hence automation. We haven't figured that out either, because we've got humans driving that mostly. But I wanted to just go a bit further, because in the last few days, literally the last few days, I thought I was reminded of this notion of knowledge and ignorance. And there's a book, I'm sure I've waved it around before, Philip Armour's book. I don't know, I've mentioned it before. I don't know if I didn't know if you've got to read it. But anyway, something that Philip Armour introduced was this concept of orders of ignorance. And it was triggered, sorry, I don't think the book was triggered, but my interest in this was triggered 20 years ago by Donald Rumsfeld. And I don't even remember him. He was the US Secretary of Defense, I'm reading here, in 2003. And I'm just going to read a little extract of a speech he made. And it's a longer paragraph, but he said, because there are known knowns, there are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns, the ones we don't know we don't know. And if one looks throughout the history of our country and other free countries, it's the latter category, unknown unknowns, that tends to be the difficult ones. So I thought, well, that always stuck with me, because when the news put that out, I thought he's just talking garbage. Because you have to really sort of think about what he's actually saying. And it's a really meaningful and succinct, and it's got a lot of credit over the years for saying something that is obvious when you think about it, but clearly puts us in a very difficult position, because, yeah, you're right. The things that really cause us the biggest problems, things we didn't even think about, we didn't realize we didn't know. Literally, it came as a surprise. So we can't do risk analysis perfectly because there's things we haven't got the imagination to do this kind of thing, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so Philip Armour, I'm just reading this off my slide. He came up with I'm trying to find it. Oh God, there's orders of ignorance, and I'm just trying to find. I just want to get it right. There we go. So level 0 is lack of ignorance. That is, our problem is well defined. So our problem is how to put up a tent. Well, we know how to put up a tent, right? You ask the question, you get the answer. AI can do that in its sleep. It's not very interesting. I mean, you could probably do it for yourself. So lack of ignorance is we know the answer. The next one is lack of knowledge. We don't know the answer, but we know how to get to it. So I can look it up in a book. If I can remember which book it is, I can find the book, find the reference, do a Google search. I can figure out a way. So these are complex but known problems, okay? The next one is lack of awareness, and it's very small. We don't know what we don't know. And in that respect, that's like the testing problem, in that we have to explore the territory in order to figure out, to trip over the things we didn't know, and then think, oh, that's interesting. And then we go and delve a bit deeper and we figure something out. So we don't know what we're going to find until we start the journey, almost. It's an exploratory kind of activity. So that is, we don't know what we don't know. The next one is, we don't know that we don't know. So that is like happy ignorance. Is like, so Donald Trump thinks he's got his answers to all the questions in the universe, and he doesn't know a damn thing about any. So he's that's the Dunning-Kruger kind of game, isn't it? You know, the less people know, the more confident they are that they know something. And so on. And then there's a fifth level, but it's level 4, lack of process. We have no mechanism for discovering how to solve the problems that we don't know about. You know, we haven't a clue. So where you really are, you know, flying, that's the Apollo 13 situation. Like, no one had run a scenario where that series of events took place, you know, and so they had to make it up on the fly. I guess that was exploratory. So they did, you know, they figured a way, didn't they? They got the guys back. But anyway, so I thought, is that relevant to our understanding of how AI can help? Because certainly the well-defined problems, AI can just find the answer. Fine, no problem. That's a coach. That's a mentor. Lack of knowledge, complex but known. I think between, I just have to read, it's very small. I need to make the bloody font bigger. That's the problem. I'm getting there, getting old. We don't know the answer, but we know how. Okay, that's complex but known. And then lack of awareness is we don't know what we don't know. You know, unknown unknowns, those games. I think AI, again, could fit into the level 1, the lack of knowledge. It can give us an answer or can give us some suggestions for answers. But lack of awareness is where you're definitely into the coaching territory, I think. So AI doesn't know the answer either, or chooses not to give you an answer because that would be a retrograde thing to offer. So I think that's the area we're in. Anyway, so I asked ChatGPT, have you heard of this book? You know, and it said, yeah, and it gave me a little summary. I thought, oh, spot on. Now, I don't know whether Philip Armour has given permission for the, I don't know. I kind of don't care. I've actually got in touch with him. I'm waiting for a reply and said, this is what I've been doing. I'd be really interested to see what you think of this. But I asked it if I can just find I've actually put it on a slide, so I just need to find that slide. So I basically said, what do you think of this idea of using orders of ignorance as a way of looking at the maturity of AI and how it can help us in the world to solve problems? And to summarize, it gave me quite a long answer. It said, this is ChatGPT. If you were to develop this idea further, particularly by integrating AI's role in problem solving along the 5 orders of ignorance spectrum, it could be a novel and valuable contribution to both software engineering and AI literature. I thought that was interesting. So it's saying, I don't know, but it sounds interesting. So basically, it's a gap in its knowledge. It sounds like, and I said, well, is anyone else working in this area? And that was the response, that I don't know of anything like that. So I thought, okay, I've stumbled across something here. So that was what I was going to say, is my next conference talk, I'm going to do a bit more work. But so my sense is it might lead nowhere. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this is the answer to all our problems. But I think we have to move away from Q&A and this mentoring approach to coaching, to ask better questions rather than give perfect answers. And as you said, we need to look in more dimensions, you know, like, and you mentioned personas. I think that's one. I think there's other dimensions. I don't know what they are because it's context specific, I suppose. So I think that's where we're going to find some answers to our problem, and also limitations to large language models. Because large language models are large language models. They're not testing models. They're not, rocket science models. They're not physics models. They're not, you know what I mean? My sense is large language models are not going to come up with innovative solutions unless we can get it to join the dots to something very unrelated, which might be applicable. And in a way, I've accidentally tripped over a book that could, do you know what I mean? That's exactly what I've done. I've just said, orders of ignorance, large language models, AI, is there a kind of a synergy, a connection that we can make use of? And ChatGPT likes it. It might think it's a lot of bollocks, but, you know.
Might also extend it to Sam to actually create under a large action model. But yeah, I love it. And, you know, we're exactly at the, 20 seconds to 1 hour, perfect kind of point to kind of allow people to go and think about this. And I think we'll definitely do a follow-up once we've got our submissions in. But actually, they come together, right, in a similar kind of way. Is this multi-threaded verse prompt thing, and there was something you said you said when I was trying to do that around just data discovery as well. Is it feels like there's multi dimensions of data discovery as well. Is information what you don't think you need to ask that actually is really important? And I think this is the whole point of Doctor in the Loop, Real Humans in the Loop. Everything is the question which you would never ask, or you would never get the model to ask, that you need to get that data discovery piece.
I think there's definitely a syndrome, which is we've got this tool, it's a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And the data we need is not just text. We need, tabulated, analyzed, statistical data. And that would help an awful lot. And obviously we can get into videos and music, sound, human voice, all that kind of whatever. But the bulk of what we're dealing with is stuff that's either in text, or we've got some data to hand which we don't know what to do with, or we've got so much of it we don't know what to do with. And I think we've got the whole multimodal thing, again, that's got to be a way forward somewhere. That's going to lead us into some interesting places.
And the poly AI stuff for understanding language, code, images, video, it's where it's going. But anyway, I think the bombshell is we've got some exciting thinking to do for next year's conferencing season. We've turned testers into superheroes. It sounds like we've got some interesting stuff for Eurostar and Star East submissions. So, we'll keep you posted. But, Paul, I think we've come at this in two ways, as always, two different ways: technical and testing and theory. And, I think there's some interesting stuff we're on here, and it'd be interesting to see what everyone else thinks as well. So, with that said, I'm going to end the live stream and thank everyone, and we'll put